Our target in HR was over 5 years, we needed to reduce costs and expense. We reduced top line budget by 25% over those 5 years.
Welcome to an inspirational people interview on the Share Life podcast. I'm Jason Scott Montoya, and today I'm here with Brady Pyle. Brady, say hello.
Hey, Jason, good to be here with you.
Brady has spent 30 years in HR at NASA, where he was the first ever leader of the other HR field center executives for the agency. Today, he brings lessons from NASA to a different context as Chief Human Resources and Inclusion Officer, or Cheerio for short, at Space Center Houston, a nonprofit science learning center and an official visitor center for NASA Johnson Space Center, hosting 1.3 million guests per year. And according to Brady, you cannot get onto NASA premises without going through their train system. So they're the gatekeepers of the Houston NASA location. Since 2013, Brady has blogged at outofthisworldleadership.com, featuring over 350 book summaries and his own recently published book. So he is a prolific writer, prolific reader, and has a lot of insights to share with us today. Start with your story, Brady. Tell us, who are you and where'd you come from?
Perfect. So I grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas. When I was in the ninth grade, I felt a calling to the government service. My
Okay.
dad and grandfather both were public servants. They had worked at the Corpus Christi Army Depot and just felt this calling. My brother went to school at Texas A&M University and played baseball there. And I learned that Texas A&M was one of the few schools that had cooperative education program opportunities for non-engineering students. So I was very excited about being part of that. I studied public administration, started my sophomore year seeking an opportunity for a co-op assignment. Worked with the Department of Health and Human Services in their Dallas personnel office and then in Washington, D.C. That's where I learned that, I really didn't want to live and work in Washington, D.C., even though that had been kind of a dream growing up. But I focused on HR, ended up getting a grad degree in human resources, and that's where I joined NASA as a graduate co-op student in 1995. And then just kind of grew up in the system. I worked for about 10 years as a internal HR consultant. What was unique about NASA at the time is that all of your customers were there on site. So it's very much a campus environment at the Johnson Space Center, and you're able to consult with them directly. A lot of other HR jobs in the government focus on multi-state regions, and you're more remote, more virtual. So worked through the system and held progressively more responsible leadership roles, became the HR director at the Johnson Space Center in 2016, held that role for 3 years, and then NASA decided to change its 60-year model of how it did things from a management perspective. And instead of reporting to the local field center directors, all the HR executives and all the different functional executives would report up through their function. So in 2018, my role became the director of HR services for NASA, and then I became the supervisor of the field HR executives. It was a tough change. You can imagine 60 years, the center directors are losing a little bit of control there. So there was a lot of frustration in the system. My role was to kind of work with those leaders and work with my HR team to make sure we worked through that transition successfully. Was in that role for a few years and then became the Deputy Chief Human Capital Officer at NASA in January of 2020.
Okay.
And then, of course, my first 90 days were very interesting because the pandemic hit
yeah.
within that time, and a lot of adjustments, a lot of changes had to be made. And then I was in that role for a few years. My boss, the Chief Human Capital Officer, was retiring, and I was kind of at a career crossroads and decided to go ahead and take early retirement from NASA, and then landed over here, as you mentioned, at Space Center Houston, which is a nonprofit of about 450 employees. And it's a fun place to be because there's always excited kids and guests down on the floor.
Yeah. Well, let's tease that out a little bit. So let's start. There's this dramatic cultural and organizational change, which is a
Right.
huge deal. Why did what was the catalyst for making that change? And did the old system work for a while, and then it just got so big it needed to change? Or talk to us about the catalyst for that.
Yeah, great question, Jason. 2018, NASA was looking at a profile in the future of flat budgets. So, flat budgets mean you're absorbing inflation. Um, it's tough to kind of manage. And from a space flight program perspective, your buying power is reduced. As they looked at the overall system, they said, "Hey, we could probably save money in how we operate all of our support functions, HR, finance, procurement, facilities." And so if we manage those functionally with a strategy of cost reduction, that will help us, maintain kind of plans for the mission. And so, our goal in HR, our target in HR was over 5 years, we needed to reduce costs and expense by 25%. So we were cutting a lot of
And
the
what year was that?
that
That
was 2018 to
okay,
20 to when I left in 23.
okay.
So we
So
reduced top line budget by 25% over those five
so
years.
you were successful at the mission. Yeah,
Yeah, we kept the HR support, to the mission, and yeah, returned, money to the mission. And so that
yeah.
was really the goal and the objective.
And terms of like you mentioned like the loss the feeling that people were feeling like they lost control. So how was that feeling versus the reality, and how did this pivot actually change effectiveness in terms of the organization being effective at what it did? Not just cost
Yeah,
cutting, but effective. Yeah.
yeah. So the loss of the local leader control was very real. What I tried to do to help mitigate that is I would meet regularly with them and try to seek to understand what were their priorities and how could we best support them. But the fact of the matter is the model was shifting from a locally optimized model to an agency optimized model. And an agency optimized model is you're not gonna make the same choices or have the same priorities as every local model.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason the the previous model cost more,
Yeah.
and took more resources. And so uh, yeah, it was a lot of conversations, a lot of relationship building to work through that together as an overall agency.
And once you got through it, then how did those people feel about the new paradigm?
I think it was probably a typical grieving process that you go
Yeah.
through and ultimately get to acceptance. It took us a few years to kind of work through that process, and um, folks realized, hey, this is the new normal. I think in our early days there was a lot of resistance and a lot of thought that, hey, maybe upper management will change, and maybe we'll go back to the previous model. And we had a couple of senior leader changes over that period of time, and they looked at the model and the overall picture and the overall goals and said, no, we need to keep this going. So um, I think people realized, hey, this is sticking, and we've got to figure out how to make it work. Um, and that, yeah, it was probably a
Yeah.
natural grieving
Yeah.
process.
So there was something that they lost. Was there anything they gained in the new model and the new paradigm that they came to appreciate later on?
So what we found is we went to more of a shared services model for our hiring and staffing. And that was painful up front because you went from staffers that had local knowledge and local expertise, and you kind of pooled that team together. But I think what we found overall is that we were able to deliver that service more efficiently and more effectively as a pool of resources. Some of the centers that were more heavily resourced and had more of that expertise saw a slight degradation in service, but overall and on average, the service was improved for the whole agency.
Yeah. I mean, what type of mission or goal would lead to going back to the old model?
Well, you would be making the decision that, hey, we're gonna we're going to expend more resource, and we're going to optimize again locally. That's really the if you made that decision, you would be making the trade of, hey, local optimization is more important, and we're okay, with that level of investment. Um,
And I guess
I
I'm trying to wonder what the
Yeah,
scenario is that becomes the. I could even imagine a scenario where you have your agency model, and then maybe you have like a kind of a localized, like a little silo that to accomplish a particular mission or objective. But I don't know. What do you think?
yeah, no, and actually, Jason, you're describing a lot of the strategy that we took. So, um, what we did is we pulled together some services, like the staffing and hiring. But then we also, at the same time, we stood up internal consulting roles. So a couple of our centers had HR business partner models, but not everyone did. And so we set that up for every local organization. You're going to have an HR business partner model that serves as your internal consultant, and then the liaison back to the shared services. And so we kind of did a blended model of both, where you
Okay.
did
Yeah.
have your local support and
Yeah.
then relied
Mm,
more heavily on the pooled resources.
yeah. Now, talk to us about what it was like in the pandemic.
So what was interesting is, I mentioned that I lived and worked in Houston, Texas, and a
Yeah.
lot of my meetings in up until the pandemic, I was remote, but most of the other people were in a room. And so it was pretty clunky, to be honest. I mean, I would catch 70 to 80% of what was said in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the pandemic forced us all to be in this environment and improve my life quite a bit, because I could I could engage a little bit differently with everyone. For NASA in general, it was a hard shift, moving to a virtual environment for a period of time. And some of the projects and organizations tried to keep that going even when we were able to come back on site. And what was interesting is, one of the last meetings I was in at NASA, they were reviewing a project that had been delayed a little bit, and it was a robotic project. And one of the panel members that was reviewing the project expressed a concern that, he said, in a lot of cases at NASA, engineers will get together kind of in the hallway or informally and kind of share things. Hey, this doesn't feel quite right, or this, I'm concerned about this issue with the project. But they won't do that when formal meetings are scheduled. And so what was lost kind of in the pandemic or in the remote environment were some of those conversations. And there was a lot of concern at NASA at the time, particularly for human space flight, that, hey, we might be missing some serious safety concerns and issues. And so I know NASA's had a big push the last couple of years to get people back on site, and that's primarily why.
Yeah.
Now, support functions like HR and others uh, have been a little bit more in the remote model, because they're supporting customers from across the agency.
Yeah. And so, just to clarify, what does the NASA falls under what part of the government? How does that work? What's the
Yeah,
hierarchy?
it's an independent federal agency, and so the president appoints an administrator that heads NASA, and then the president proposes a budget and priorities each year, and then Congress will debate that budget and priorities. And that's one of the things that's a little bit tricky, because if you think about agencies like the CIA has a 10-year budget and then a 10-year administrator, so they tend to have a little bit more continuity. From a business perspective, that would make more sense for NASA, because a lot of the programs and projects are longer term. And when you have a turnover of presidential administration, a lot of times there's change in priority and shift. And so um, budgets change, priorities change. And that's hard when you're working a 20 to 30 year development program.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, I mean, it's a lot of wasted funds,
So
frankly.
I think what you're saying is every new president is a new NASA administration,
Yes,
and so
they appoint their leader of NASA. So uh, when Trump came in this time, right now there's not an appointee. He had someone scheduled to be appointed and then withdrew that name.
Okay.
Um, and
So
the
what
way the
happens in the
process,
interim?
so internal leaders, actually the former center directors at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida and the Johnson Space Center here in Houston are kind of holding down the first and second positions of leadership. And they're
Okay.
kind of in acting capacity, but they're carrying out the budget priorities of the administration right now.
Okay. Got it. So, I guess a few things. One, as as a federal agency, I imagine just at a minimum from the public, there's a level of scrutiny that you feel or pressure. Is that the case, or are you pretty shielded from it when you're inside the organization?
Yeah, actually, has a pretty strong positive brand in the
Hmm.
public, and so generally there's a lot of public support for NASA and what it does, and most people don't know what all NASA is doing, but they have a positive feeling
Yeah.
about it and about the organization. The other thing I should point out too is that NASA is a civilian agency, so we're not part of the Department of Defense. Department of Defense also, in Trump's first term, he broke out the U.S. Space Force as a
Okay.
separate defense entity. Used to be under the Air Force, but he broke it out as a separate entity.
Okay.
Sometimes the Space Force may work projects with NASA, but NASA is a civilian agency, not part of Department of Defense. That's what has allowed NASA over the years to do unique partnerships with Russia, for example. I mean, even during the Cold War, we had the Apollo Soyuz program, and
Yeah.
we've partnered with Russians on the civilian side of space.
Yeah. And what were the reasons for that? Like, what was the value of partnering with our enemies in that way?
Well, I would say there's a lot of benefit of different approaches, different ideas, and then working together in service of exploration goals. Um, it's very unique, and the fact that our countries are able to work together. We're living and working together on board the International Space Station. There was a little tension when Russia invaded Ukraine,
Yeah.
but the astronauts and cosmonauts kind of work together, and they have built such bonds and such relationships that did not, impede their work together or their relationships.
Yeah. Now, um, I guess what would you want people to know about NASA, like the general public? What's something you would want people to know that maybe they don't know, but they'd appreciate if they did?
Yeah, so I'm proud to say, Jason, we were named best place to work in government for 12 straight years now. But it wasn't always that way. You might think, well, hey, working at NASA, yeah, of course it's going to be the best place to work at government. But from a HR team perspective, there were a lot of specific things we did um, to push us in that direction. One was we started paying attention to the regular employee engagement surveys that are done each year, and then focus on a couple of improvements to make. And so um, the types of things that we did there are the types of things that any organization can do. And I'm proud to say the last 2 years at Space Center Houston, we've taken some of those same approaches and improved our employee engagement as well. But it is a great place to work. It's got a great mission, great purpose, um, but it's still a workplace of people, and
Yeah.
so you've got to do some intentional things to make it a great place to work.
Yeah. So you shifted from NASA to the Space Center, which is a nonprofit. So you're independent of this federal agency now, and then that's just donors that are contributing to this that fund it.
Yeah, most of our funding comes from our tickets at the gate,
Oh, okay.
about 80%, and
Oh,
then we
wow.
have we have some donors, we have some memberships, we also get sponsorships from some businesses as well. And then we have some education programs. Students can come to summer camps, for
Yeah.
example, or we've got some adult education programs as well.
Okay.
And so that all kind of pulls together and makes up our revenue base.
So, what would you say is the biggest difference between an agency that's part of a government, which has no is going to last as long as the government wants it to, versus a business that you kind of have to meet the bottom line and be profitable?
Right. Um, so first, I just gotta say, um, moving from NASA to Space Center Houston, the freedom from an HR perspective of not having federal regulations, federal rules, um, is just incredible. So when I got here, I did a listening tour for my first 3 months to kind of see, what were the areas of focus? What did we need to do? There was a lot of consternation at the time about our support for mental health and wellness, um, our time off policies. We had a traditional vacation and sick time off policy. And so we pulled together a team of employees from across the organization to look at some of the policies. And one of them was they came up with a proposal for paid time off that kind of combined vacation and sick, and then also offered support for mental health and wellness days as well. Because people were stuck between, gosh, if I need a mental health day, I'm not really sick.
Yeah.
It's not really a vacation, so they were kind of feeling the struggle there. Paid time off gives a little bit more flexibility and freedom, but the beauty of that is we weren't constrained by government rules and system. We could do what makes sense. So we've done that there. We also have changed our uh, pay structure. I wanted to make sure we had a transparent system for pay, and then we're developing career paths. Um, what I'm loving over here, I've told people it feels a little bit like a sandbox because you can do what you want, do what makes sense, and support the organization's success. So to your point of being in an environment where you need to have positive revenue. I mean, I've joined the organization at a time when we're growing, and so we've had net revenues the last several years, and we're actually um, piling those revenues up for future capital improvement. We have our signature display out front is the shuttle carrier aircraft, so a big Boeing 747 plane with a model of the space shuttle sitting on top of it, just as it flew back in the shuttle days, and that's outside in the elements. So we're working right now on a expansion campaign that would hopefully cover that in the future and provide a greater guest experience.
Yeah. So let's kind of dive into a little bit of your wisdom and perspective. So when you think about living better, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, living better for me is making sure I'm in a good place spiritually. So where's my relationship with Jesus? How am I doing there? When I'm at peace and my relationship is strong there, I show up as a better person, and that impacts my
Yeah.
relationships as well. And so,
And is your faith something that you've held on to all your whole life, or was it some a big change in the middle of it?
no, I grew up in a family that we went to church regularly and had faith conversations regularly, and I made the decision to follow Christ at a very young age, at the age of
Yeah.
7,
Okay.
and have been on that journey ever since. Um, and yeah, faith is very important to me, very important to my wife and kids and family as well.
Yeah. And you read a lot of books. Do you read a lot in the Christian arena?
Yeah, I read a mix of, so I'll read HR and leadership books
Okay.
generally, and then also Christian leadership, and then also books that help me be a better husband or
Yeah.
father as well.
What are some of your top books?
Top books on the Christian side. Well, right now I'm doing a study again that I did about 10 years ago on Experiencing God by the Blackabees, um, which is just powerful reminder of how God speaks and how God works. Um, I'm big on John Maxwell stuff as
Okay.
well. His
Yeah.
is more business focused, but the 360-degree leader was a formative book for me. When I read it, I had strong relationships with my boss and my team,
Yeah.
but it really pointed to the need of peer relationships, and so that was critical learning right before I became a leader of peers.
Yeah.
Um, his leadership gold is great. Yeah, I'd probably have to chew on that a little more,
Yeah.
Jason.
All of which you probably have commentaries on all of those, right?
There are on my website. There's a link that directly to general leadership books or to Christian leadership books, and yeah, a lot of those summaries are out there.
Yeah, that's cool. Now let's talk about the work side. So what does it mean to work smarter?
Working smarter for me is about being intentional about how I'm spending my time, and I have lived over the years by a calendar, and so making sure the calendar reflects my priorities. What I've found here, it's been interesting moving from the NASA job where I mean it was meetings like this, virtual, 8 to 4 or 5 each day, and very little margin. At Space Center Houston, I've found that I've got more margin and more time, and for me, it's very important to build in those seasons of times of kind of personal retreat and reflection to reflect on kind of goals and where I am. So I try to do that once a quarter. I actually keep a balanced scorecard for myself that shows how I'm doing at work, and then also my roles as a husband and father in church and other places I serve as well.
Okay.
So it's a way to reflect on kind of
Yeah.
those goals and progress.
Yeah. And you've talked a little bit about mentorship, but kind of let's
Yeah.
lean into that. Like, what's the importance of mentorship and how's that played a role in your journey?
Oh yeah, mentoring is huge. So that's one of the big tips that I have for leaders is to get a mentor. In fact, I usually ask leaders when I'm in front of them, who's on your Mount Rushmore of mentors?
Yeah.
Can you quickly identify uh, 4 people who have shaped you and shaped your leadership philosophy and style? Um, one story that was pivotal for me. I had a mentor probably 20 years ago. It was after the Shuttle Columbia accident in 2004, and we were doing a lot of hiring in our engineering area to beef that up to get the shuttle to return to flight. And so I had kids at the time that were 4 and 2. I would work my work day, go home, have dinner with the family, um, help put the kids to bed, and then I would go back in and do some work. And I had a mentor who said, hey, at this life stage, it's easy to focus on the kids and your role as a father, but make sure you're nurturing your relationship with your wife as well. And so had a conversation with my wife and made some adjustments to where I wasn't doing that and making sure I was being more intentional about pouring into that relationship.
Yeah.
But I was having someone who had been on the journey
Yeah.
um, and was able to offer that perspective that it probably wouldn't have
Yeah.
occurred to me otherwise.
Well, he pointed it out, so you had someone to point it out, but you were also receptive to it. So it was a
Sure.
double edge benefit there. And would you say, like, from the position of you mentoring others, is that something that you've intentionally explored? Has it happened organically?
It's a little of both, Jason. So I would say with my team members, I'm very intentional about providing mentoring and perspective. You know, being in HR, having a mentoring program is also really important to us as an organization. Um, when I was at NASA, we actually branded the program at one point Yoda, your
Okay.
opportunity to develop another, and then Lucasfilms gave us a special Yoda pin we did that a couple of cycles, and then we learned, gosh, the research really points to mentoring is most effective when it's two-way. So we had
Mm-hmm.
to move away from the Yoda branding because that kind of
Yeah.
infers the more senior person. And so we've intentionally had over the years more opportunities for reverse mentoring and two-way mentoring. And at Space Center Houston right now, I'm in a reverse mentoring relationship where I'm meeting with a very junior employee and we're having conversations about just kind of our communication, some of our HR plans, what's her perspective of those, what's her
Yeah.
advice on how we can, make the organization better going forward.
Yeah. That's a really important dynamic because despite someone's maybe seniority or even experience, we all have something to contribute, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I'll have a point of view and a perspective that needs to be heard and understood.
Yeah, and that helps us have a more complete picture of the situation. So, let's talk about stories and narratives. Like, how have real or fictional stories and narratives shaped you as a person?
So I would say I was shaped heavily by the influences I had from my grandfather and father. Their core values, that though they never expressed them, they lived them. Values of integrity to do what you say, excellence to do your best, and improvement to get better over time. And those have certainly stuck with me. Story in particular with my dad. Growing up, we would do yard work together, and then when I was in high school, I actually had a small yard business that gave me spending money, to do things in high school, and then also built up a little bit of savings as I went to college. But Dad would actually help me do the yards, and the thing that stuck with me is, he had a saying, if you can't find time to do it right, how will you find time to do it over? Are you doing your work with excellence? Are you doing your best? And so with my kids, I've done the same thing. You don't know if that ever sticks with your kids, but I actually tell some of that story in my book, and my son, as he read it, he goes, "Oh, now I understand why you always talked about doing your work with excellence." And
Yeah,
um, so hopefully over time, some of those seeds will sprout.
yeah. Now you've read a lot of books. Do you read any fiction or just nonfiction?
I primarily a nonfiction guy. I like leadership books and
Yeah.
yeah, some biographies, but it's mostly leadership books or Christian books.
Okay. So do you have a fictional outlet like movies or shows, or you just steer away from fiction, generally speaking?
So I am a Star Wars fan.
Okay.
So mostly Darth Vader. All right, there
Chewie.
you go. Chewie. I so I like the Darth Vader persona, particularly from an HR perspective. So I have a little Darth
Oh,
Vader
okay.
helmet on my desk and different things. And in that Yoda mentoring program, I used to dress as Darth Vader. We would
Oh,
dress as
okay. Yeah.
characters for the kickoff and closing events that we would have. But yeah, and I like watching fiction things with the kids as
Yeah.
they grew up, and even now my youngest just graduated high school, so we're entering a different stage.
Yeah. Now let's talk about systems. How do you think about systems and use systems in your work and life?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Particularly, I have grown up in systems because NASA is all about systems and processes. And when I got to Space Center Houston, there were very few systems and
Okay.
processes set up because they were, had been for a long time. There were a lot of practices, organizational practices that just had been done or passed down from leader to leader. And what we're finding here as we're growing and as we're getting more and more people, it's the importance of standard operating procedures, policies, systems, um, is becoming important to us, and particularly from a cultural perspective. If we're trying to intentionally drive, a culture of inclusion and innovation, how did the systems and structures support that? And so we're paying a lot of attention to that. at work. I would say on a personal perspective, I mentioned earlier I like balanced scorecard. So I use different systems myself to, manage my time, manage my life, and make sure my priorities and how I'm spending my time line up, how I want them to line
Yeah. If when does a system become tyrannical?
up. um, I think when you're not willing to make adjustments to it that make sense. I think you've always got to be open. To me, when we write policies, process systems, um, I always think of them as living documents that need to adjust or change, as either circumstances or technology or
Yeah.
even as players change. You've got to be able to respond to those, and I think they can frustrate people and really frustrate the overall organization. You're married to a particular system or process that no longer makes sense. So I think you've constantly got to be in the learning mode and making those adjustments.
Yeah. How does what causes someone to become like that kind of in that learning mode, like a lifelong learner, always, trying to improve versus kind of being more static and set in your ways?
That's a great question. So on the Strengths Finder, my top strength is learner. I
Okay.
mentioned earlier that core values passed on to me about improvement and getting better over time. So those things are very natural for me, and just how I'm wired. Um, but I definitely try to encourage that mindset on the team. We need to be a learning organization. We need to be out there understanding the trends and understanding what's going on, and then be willing to adjust our systems and processes accordingly. So
Yeah.
I think part of it is leadership expectation. Part of it is training and new knowledge, and keep emphasizing those things.
Yeah. So what are your top 5 strengths finders?
Yeah, so learner is one, relator, belief, analytical, and responsibility are my top
Okay.
five.
Okay. I
Yeah,
got futuristic, context, ideation, connectedness, and can't remember the 5th one.
nice.
Yeah. Now, is that something you did on your own? Is that something you do in your organization?
So we actually, uh, the first time I did it was about 20 years ago. And when learner showed up, it was really helpful to me because I hadn't really thought of that as a strength. Um, and what I did on my balance scorecard starting then is at the time, 20 years ago, learner and achiever were my two top. And so I would set goals around what am I going to learn and what I'm going to achieve in each kind of role in life. Um, it's interesting, 20 years later, achiever didn't show up. I think
Oh,
that's
okay.
largely because I've moved into these executive roles where I'm surrounded by achievers and they're achieving. So,
Oh,
so
you're
it's
kind of
more,
adapting to the context. Yeah.
yeah, so it's more kind of the relator becomes more important and the relationships. And so that's been kind of interesting.
Yeah. Strategic is the 5th one.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Now, what about personality testing? Do you use that as well? Do you do Big 5, Myers-Briggs, something else?
Not regularly here. I mean, over time, of course, I've done those. Myers-Briggs, DISC, the Berkman was a big one at NASA as well.
Okay.
Um, yeah, we have a new team member on our HR team who, in our previous organization, had done StrengthsFinder and was certified in presenting that. So she brought that to our team here about a month or two ago,
Yeah.
and that's where it was interesting, just seeing, you know, 20 years ago where I was and
Yeah.
now where I am. And that's another thing I do, Jason, is any assessment I do, I've got a folder and a place where I keep it so I
Yeah.
can refer back to those things and how those shift over time.
Yeah. I mean, from what I remember with StrengthsFinder, like there might be like a small shift, but it's not. It doesn't seem to move a whole lot over time. Is that your experience as well?
Well, the Achiever was like one of my top ones, and it disappeared.
So it was all the way, like,
My
do you
top
know how
5.
high it was?
I don't remember exactly. It was in Achiever and Learner were my top 2
Okay.
back 20 years ago, and then Achiever is falling out
So
of
it
the
was
top
in the
5.
top 2 then. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
But
don't
the other
know.
4 maintained, it was just that one that changed?
That was the main one that changed. Yeah.
Okay.
The responsibility, analytical were there.
Okay.
Belief has actually moved up as well,
Okay.
which is interesting because I've done a lot of reflection, I think, in the blogging and in the writing of the book of how my values were shaped. And so I've done a lot of thinking about that
Mm,
probably more in the last 20 years than I did
yeah.
prior to that.
Okay. Well, you've got a lot to share. So is there anything else you want to talk about that you haven't yet had a chance to?
Yeah, I'm excited to share kind of what I've learned at NASA, the experiences I've had with other people, whether that's through a conversation, through speaking engagements. Uh, Hopefully, folks will also be able to pick up some content either from my blog or I've got one book out there now. Hopefully, the second will be out there about a year from now. And so, yeah, just excited to engage with folks and share some of that learning. And um, as I've mentioned the last 10 years I've been out there speaking to different people. The things that we did at NASA can be done anywhere. And I think I'm living proof of that now in this different context at Space Center Houston uh, as our Cheerio.
So, what type of organization would be a good fit for you to do, to speak or teach the things that you have to share, do a presentation? Like, what types of organizations, what kind of problems are those organizations facing?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at if you're struggling to improve employee engagement, if you're struggling with developing the roadmap on developing culture, if you're trying to develop leaders, we had some good um, methods and ways of kind of developing a leadership culture and leaders that develop other leaders.
Yeah.
And there are some very specific tools and techniques around uh, that are helpful.
Okay. And best way for them to reach out, is that to go to outofthisworldleadership.com, or do you have another place for your teaching?
That that's one good place. They could also go to bradypyle.com. It'll redirect them to that
Okay.
site, or LinkedIn is a good way to connect with me as well.
Okay, cool. So LinkedIn and your website, we'll put links to those in the notes. Anything else? Any last final words?
I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you, Jason. It's been a good conversation, and yeah, just looking forward to further engagements with folks in your audience who want to dig a little deeper.
Brady, I do have one last thing. You got to tell us about this Brady Bunch connection here.
I was actually named for the Brady Bunch. My brother is 4 years older, and like my parents were asking him about his favorite TV show, and fortunately, it was the Brady Bunch and not Gomer Pyle at the time. I'm forever grateful for that.
Well, with your last name being Pyle, then Gomer Pyle would have been a
That,
natural
that
fit.
was an option. That was an option.
But Brady is your first name. It's more used. Brady Bunch is more well known. What
Right.
do you say? Do you agree?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think so. Particularly when they came out with a movie here a little more recently.
So cool. Check out his website, outofthisworldleadership.com. I've been talking with Brady Pyle. My name is Jason Scott Montoya, and this has been another episode of the Share Life podcast. We'll see you on the next one.
All right. Thank you.